Superboy Prime is known for breaking the fourth wall. In fact, he's fully aware he's in a comic. But what would happen if a very powerful enemy finally got their hands on that information and used it against him? I think we're about to find out. Let's get into it. What's up, everybody, and welcome to Variant. This past week, we had an incredibly full slate for New Comic Book Day. And I'm talking about big issues in major titles from Marvel, DC, Image, you name it. We actually get asked all the time what's on our weekly pull list and if the buy list is coming back to the show. And the answer to that is yes. Yes, it is. I'm not going to go over everything on our pull list right now, but I am going to break down one of our top picks this week, and that's Superman issue 38. I've been really interested in how Josh Williamson has been building Superboy Prime's presence in the DC universe since his return back in Superman issue 25 or so. And now with Superman's disappearance at the end of the KO event, Superboy Prime has effectively become the Superman of the DC universe. And speaking of Superman taking off at the end of the KO event, we are finally going to get to see where he disappeared to in the upcoming Superman 2026 annual Year 1000 #1. It currently has a release date for July 29th, and you better believe when that thing drops, we are going to be right here to break the whole thing down. Because the synopsis basically tells us that Superman has traveled to the end of time to fight Darkseid and reverse everything he's infected. And I have to imagine that that story is going to play a huge role in setting up the absolute crisis event. Anyway, we covered Superman issue 36 in this episode right here, which establishes Superboy Prime as the new Superman and introduces Manchester Black at the end of that issue. And if you know anything about Manchester Black and how powerful he is, you already know that's the big bad in this story. And you are not going to believe where Superboy Prime ends up by the end of issue 38. So let's dive in. However, if you do want my entire pull list for this week, I've added it to the homepage at variantcomics.com, and I've even made several of them available for you to pick up for yourself. So, you know, enjoy and stuff. All right, so the last issue we covered in the Superman title was issue 36. So we're going to start with issue 37, and we're going to work our way all the way through issue 38 so you guys have the full story. Now, as I mentioned, the end of Superman issue 36 left us with the reappearance of Manchester Black, but he's in some kind of ghostly form or mystical projection. But it also left us with Superboy Prime having moved into his own apartment, and he's working at a comic shop in Metropolis while twilighting as Superman. But another strange thing that happened in issue 36 was he kept having these moments where he would almost get pulled out of reality and see himself inside of a comic page. And that's going to be important as this story progresses. But issue 37 opens up with Superboy Prime fighting gods and telling us what he's been up to since the last issue, saying, "I've been super busy, saved the world, did some sightseeing, visited a few locations I never got to on my past trips, protected Metropolis from uber baddies. I even tried to sneak into Themyscira." Am I saying that right? Themyscira? Anyway, I thought if a dork like Steve Trevor could do it, so could I. But when we turn the page, we see that Prime is actually telling this to Ma and Pa Kent, who Lois introduced him to at the end of Superman issue 35. She introduced him as basically an orphaned version of their son, so they've kind of taken him under their wing and have been looking after him. Anyway, he goes on to say, the Amazons were not a fan of that. It was like, is that a bird? No, it's a Superboy flying away as fast as he can. But that's a story for another day, as we see Ma and Pa Kent getting a good laugh out of it. We also see that the table is just full of empty plates as Superboy Prime is just putting down mountains of food. And as he continues to eat, he tells the Kents, "Seriously though, thank you for having me over to Smallville for breakfast. Being a superhero is hungry work, and all I have time to eat is junk food. A home-cooked meal hits the spot. I gotta say, I'm glad you two are alive." Now that last comment is not the favorite for Jonathan and Martha Kent, and Pa Kent says, "I'm sorry, what did you say?" And once again, Superboy Prime just says way too much and answers them with information about their lives across the multiverse. He says, "There are some fans who prefer Clark Kent's parents dead, or like that you had another heart attack, Jonathan. Surprisingly, Mark Waid wishes you two were 6 feet under. But personally, I like it when you're here. You two really ground the whole mythology. Superman has all these epic adventures in space, and then it's like farm stuff." And the funny thing is that Mark Waid actually adds a little note at the bottom of this panel confirming that he does in fact wish that these two were 6 feet under. But Prime then goes on to ask for more food, which neither John or Martha Kent are thrilled with. And Martha calls Jonathan across the kitchen for a word in private, and she tells him he's gonna eat us out of house and home. To which Paul replies, "That's what you're worried about?" However, obviously Superboy Prime can hear everything that they're saying, so he chimes in, "You don't have to worry about me. I'm not gonna do anything, and even if I were, you know, I can hear them." And Jonathan turns and replies, "Hear who?" At which point Superboy Prime points up and says, "Them." And as we turn the page, we see it's Power Girl and other Justice League members who have been sent by Mr. Terrific to keep an eye on Superboy Prime. Prime continues, "Mr. Terrific has one of his teams watching me. Justice League Red, Blue, Purple, Turquoise, whatever. They have me surrounded because I'm visiting you. If I sneeze wrong, they will come crashing through the walls. They're unhappy that Lois and Terrific let me be free. Some of the League have a real beef with me. I mean, it's tempting. Part of me wants them to crash down here. Then I can show those trolls what prime time really means. But that's what they want. They want me to mess up. They expect me to mess up. I just want to prove to everyone that I can be better, that I can do the right thing. I can be Superman. He then puts his hands in his pockets and his head drops as he says, what's the use? I shouldn't be here. I'm just gonna go. This week was really hard and I just wanted someone to talk to. This of course plays on the Kent's heartstrings and they ask Prime to sit down. Pa Kent then tells Prime, or as he asked him to call him, CK, our Clark, had hard times too. It wasn't always easy for him either. Martha then grabs him by the hand and says, tell us what happened. And Prime responds, well, it started Wednesday morning. We are then taken to Wednesday morning in Asteroid Comics in Metropolis, which is where Prime got a job. And as we enter the comic shop, we see Prime going back and forth with this girl about comic recommendations they've given each other. She then clearly begins to flirt with Prime, saying, you know, if you ever wanted more recommendation, you could hang out at my place and borrow some comics. But Superboy Prime is, as usual, oblivious, and he says, why would I need to do that? I've got all the comics I need right here. And when the comic shop owner hears this, all he can do is sigh, and he asks, can I speak with you for a moment? We then see the young lady is walking out, rolling her eyes, seemingly frustrated, as Superboy Prime says, sure thing, boss. Hey, happy Wednesday. See you next week. Now, you might be thinking that dude was stepping in here to be a good wingman and let him know, like, hey, she was giving you a shot, man. But nope, it's a reprimand. And he tells Prime, listen, you're a great employee. You organized all our backstock, and you can do the count and the pool faster than anyone I've ever seen. It's a huge help. The customers love you, even if you can get a little bit too passionate about certain comics. Followed by an awesome panel of Superboy Prime yelling at somebody, they should be married, clearly talking about the relationship between Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson, which is a majority sentiment amongst Marvel fans. And Superboy Prime actually just linked up with Peter Parker's Spider-Man in the DC Marvel Spider-Man Superman crossover. I broke that story down in its entirety in this episode right here. But jumping back to the issue, Prime responds to his boss, I know, I'm working on it. At which point his boss says, but, and Prime tells him, I knew a but was coming. However, his boss continues, but you're late every day, and I notice you take long lunch breaks. Like, why were you late this morning? We then get the answer for ourselves with a panel of Superboy Prime in Atlantis, battling this sea creature and thinking he's helping while he's really just making the situation worse. As Mara says, Prime, you're not helping. It just wants to go home. However, Prime obviously can't tell him that, so he just nervously says, traffic? But his boss calls him out on that by asking, don't you live like 2 blocks away? Prime doesn't have an answer, so the boss just finally says, look, what you do outside this place is your business. This shop is my business. The point is, I didn't get into comics to discipline people. I got into it because I love comic books, and I know you love comic books. So hear me out. You're up for Employee of the Month, okay? Just don't be late tomorrow, CK. We then cut to Superboy Prime flying through the city later that night while saying to himself, wow, Employee of the Month. That would be awesome. I can show that to Lois and Terrific. I can show them all. I can be a great Superman and manage a super work-life balance. All I need to do is be on time tomorrow. But we then see him flying over Monarch Theater in Gotham as he continues to say to himself, I've been visiting famous locations from the comics I used to read, and now Crime Alley. He then descends onto the street in Crime Alley where the Waynes were gunned down as he continues to say, the deaths of the Waynes, to see a place of such importance in person, it's not what I thought. I didn't think this would feel so morbid, gross. But not surprisingly, someone is keeping an eye on him and he hears over his shoulder, what are you doing here? And as we turn the page, we see that that someone is Damian Wayne, who has never encountered Superboy Prime in comics before. So this is a very cool meetup. Damian, however, doesn't think so as he attempts to attack Prime, but all he manages to do is shatter his katana on Prime's shoulder. He then hangs off a wall while telling Prime, that was brand new, to which Prime responds, you knew that sword wouldn't work on me, right? But this is Damian Wayne, easily the most proud member of the Batman family. So he just replies, what are you doing here? Prime nervously responds, sightseeing? But Damian is unamused, so he tells him, get out of my city. And then immediately attempts to grapple away. However, Superboy can fly. So Prime just chases after him saying, Damian, I mean, Robin, wait up. We never really met before and you were created after I returned. I was hoping to ask you a question. And as Damian jumps across rooftops, he reluctantly asks what the question is. And Superboy proceeds to ask with basically no self-awareness, you had this reputation, right, of being an annoying little brat for sure, but also of being this little deadly assassin, of being a killer. We then see that Damian is just continuing to do whatever it is he's up to as this conversation takes place. Specifically, he's trying to open a manhole while replying, your point? And Prime replies, you beat the rap, you turned it around, and now people like you. How? Damian then gives the exact answer you might imagine he would give and says, I just assume everyone hates me and then I don't care. But Prime walks over, lifts the manhole that Damian is having trouble with and tells him that can't be all there is to it. But Damian just shrugs him off and continues on doing what he's doing, saying, I'm too busy for this. For you. One of Batman's rogues stole deadly chemicals from Star Labs and I tracked them into these tunnels. So Superman follows him saying, I can help. But Damian tells him, I don't need your help. However, at that moment, Clayface comes out of nowhere and attacks both of them while telling Damian, you're gonna need it. Clayface then begins to completely envelop Superboy Prime, at which point Damian Wayne is thankful for the help and he says, fine, keep Clayface busy while I find the bomb. The struggling Prime replies, what bomb? And of course the villain's got a monologue, so Clayface tells Prime it's a chemical bomb filled with some nasty junk. Once it goes off, the city will be in for a big surprise. We then see Prime's eyes glow red and he tells Clayface, get ready to burn, buddy. However, Damian tells him, don't. I might need Clayface awake to deactivate the bomb. Just keep holding him. So as Prime unleashes a blast of heat vision on Clayface, he says, hold him. Right, okay. Hey, so I'm mostly a pre-Crisis fan, but I gotta say, you are legit my favorite version of Clayface. To which the angry Clayface responds, don't you ever shut up? Damian hears this and says, I hate when I agree with Father's enemies. Where is that bomb? So as Prime lands a punch on Clayface, he tells Damian, hold on, I can do more than just beat people up. I got X-ray vision too. Followed by searching the tunnels and identifying the location of the bomb, and he tells Robin, the bomb is 2 tunnels down from you, make a left. However, when Prime looks up, Clayface is gone, and standing in his place is Superman saying, it's okay, Superboy Prime. I stopped Clayface and returned him to Arkham already. I appreciate you filling in for me while I was gone. I know it's not easy, but I'm proud of you, son. You can go home now, Prime. But Prime is not fooled, and he does not appreciate Clayface playing with his emotions like that. So he freezes Clayface and then punches him into pieces. But again, Damian needed Clayface in one piece to disarm the bomb. And when he finally finds it, there's only 10 seconds before it goes off. So Prime swoops in, grabs the entire tank that the bomb is attached to, and flies off to throw it into the sky. However, Damian says to him, you can't just throw a bomb into the sky. The explosion will still distribute chemicals across the city. But in this instance, Prime does know what he's doing. So he flies the bomb up as high as he can into the air, chucks it, and then hits it with his heat vision so the chemicals can't disperse. He then starts to fly back all proud of himself saying, see, your city is saved. But at that moment, it starts to happen again as he begins to be ripped from reality and starts to transform into a sketch drawing on a comic panel. But he also gets a flashback to the Crisis event where he massacred several DC heroes while simultaneously hearing a voice tell him, this is who you really are, Prime. You cannot deny your destiny. The only way to change is to punch your way out. We then see Prime scream as he snaps back into the present and finds himself on a rooftop in early morning. Damian is sitting on top of a tower watching over him and he tells him, finally, you landed and blacked out. I got Clayface secure and then stayed. This surprises Prime and he asks, did you really risk being captured by the GCPD to keep watch over me all night? Damian then responds, possibly. And not surprisingly, this excites Superboy and he says, did we just become friends? But Damian tells him, I have enough friends, including a Superboy, already checked off the list. But Prime is never one to give up, so he tells him, you can have more than one. We can be your super friends. They then turn and look over Gotham in the early morning as Prime says, wow, now that is a sight to see. Gotham during the day is wild. Wait, what time is it? And Damian tells him it's almost 10 a.m. Why? At which point Superboy Prime remembers he could not be late for work this morning and he takes off screaming, crap! But as Prime flies off, I guess as a thank you, Damian finally tells him, wait, I lied before when you asked me about my rep. I do care. It took people not judging me by my worst moments, but change wasn't easy. It took time. You just need to keep trying, which is exactly what Prime was hoping to hear. So he thanks Damian and he takes off. We then see him land on the fire escape above the comic shop and he's frantically trying to change into his street clothes while telling himself, I gotta figure out what the deal is with those weird visions. But first, please, 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 no, no, no. As he races to the front door of the comic shop, but he is greeted by his boss who says, you're late again. Prime tells him, I tried. But in true nerd fashion, he replies, do or do not. I had to give Employee of the Month to someone else. Better luck next time if you don't mess up. And with that, we return to the Kent's kitchen table where Prime has been telling them this entire story. And he finishes the whole thing by telling them, I saved Gotham. I made a new friend, sort of, but I really wanted that Employee of the Month. And it's silly, but that was important to me. And now I can't even come here to see you without the Justice League watching me like a hawk. Do you have any idea what it's like to have so many people expect you to fail? To know that no matter how hard you try, they only see your mistakes. Now, I will say here, he kind of killed a whole bunch of people. So it's not your everyday run-of-the-mill mistakes, but I get it. Anyway, that is all Martha Kent needed to hear, and she just goes into full mom mode. She stands up and says, sit tight, dear, followed by walking outside to address the Justice League members, who are kind of just sitting around bored waiting on Superboy Prime to leave, except for Power Girl, that is. She's probably the most skeptical of Superboy Prime out of all of them. And it seems Martha Kent knows that, as she calls her by name and tells her to get down there now. So Kara, like a reprimanded daughter, descends down and says, Ma, I know I should have come inside to say hi, but... However, Martha cuts her off and tells her, yes, you should have, but that is not why I wanted to talk. I know you mean well. I know you're angry. I know what Prime did, but you can't expect him to learn if you're always watching him like this. Sometimes the true sign of a good person is how they act when no one is watching. You gotta let him try. But again, as the note states in the bottom right corner, what Superboy Prime did was not pretty. So that's easier said than done for Power Girl and the others. Regardless, she respects Ma Kent, so she says, yes, ma'am, and then tells the Justice League, you heard her, return to the Watchtower. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Power Girl for any reason, and you're not sure what the dynamic is here between her and the Kents, she's from Earth 2, but she's basically treated like Superman's cousin in current continuity. So for the Kents, she's essentially family. Anyway, Martha then goes walking back into the house as Pa Kent says, that's my girl. And Martha tells Prime, you're safe here, CK. Now, tell us about the rest of the week. How about that girl you were talking to at work? At which point, Prime smiles in relief and replies, oh yeah, she was nice. I hope I see her again. And as we turn the page and the issue starts to wrap up, we return to Metropolis and we do see her again. And we find her walking into an old abandoned house in the middle of the city. As kids tell her, it's haunted. I heard people go in and they never, but she just yells, boo, get out of here, kids. We then see her walking into this absolute wreck of an old place with what appears to be satanic symbols on the floor. As she calls out to someone, hello, I'm back. She then descends the stairs while continuing to tell someone, I met a nice boy the other day at the comic store. He's so innocent, maybe a little naive, but really cute. Honestly, he wouldn't hurt a fly. And on the final page, we see her reach the basement and she concludes by saying, he's perfect for our sacrifice. And she's talking to two hooded figures making some kind of a potion. But it also reveals that Comic Shop Girl is actually Witchfire. And what she and these hooded figures have planned for Prime, we'll find out as we dive into issue 38. But I can tell you this, Prime better get a good night's sleep. And who doesn't love a good night's sleep, am I right? But I will say, with the crazy schedules we all have these days, that can be a lot more elusive than it used to be. And that's especially true if you're sleeping on the wrong mattress. Take my oldest son, for example. He used to be just a little guy. Now, not so much. And he grew so fast that he literally outgrew his mattress. So it was time for an upgrade to a mattress that supports his bigger frame and where his feet don't hang off like it's a scene from Elf. Well, thankfully, we found today's sponsor, Titan Mattress. A Titan mattress is a straight up comfort zone, engineered with a mix of heavy duty coils and high quality foam that's designed to resist sagging and sinking, which means it'll support my son's growing linebacker sized assets for years to come. And my wallet is grateful. But seriously, one of the big reasons I chose Titan is because they had a third party put their mattresses to the test with over 200,000 rolls, which is double the industry norm, just to prove how durable their mattresses are. And considering we spend about a third of our life sleeping, that's the kind of commitment to quality you want to see from the people who make your mattress. I know my son definitely thinks so. In fact, he's already started putting his Titan mattress to the test. And so far, it's not only passed his body crash test, but his sleep improved immediately. So if you're also in the market for a better night's sleep on a new mattress, Titan is so confident that they can make that happen for you that they offer a 120-night sleep trial and a limited lifetime warranty. And to make your decision even easier, when you visit titanmattress.com/variant comics, you'll get 30% off your order by using code variant comics. Trust me when I tell you, your back will thank you. And after your first night's sleep, come back and let us know how much it improved your sleep life. Alright, Superman issue 38, which is part 3 of the Primetime story arc, opens up back in Metropolis, with Prime closing up shop for the night at Asteroid Comics and chatting it up with a couple of the customers. We then see him walking back to his apartment and thinking to himself, I should have asked those nerds if they wanted to keep hanging out, but I'm not sure if I have the time for social stuff right now. Not if I'm gonna prove I can be Superman. But is that what Clark would do? Lois said he always found time for both. I wish I could talk to Superman, or at least get a sign of what I should. But his thought is interrupted by someone screaming nearby. And when we turn the page, we see it's the comic shop girl, or who we now know as Witchfire, running from Frankenstein, Wolfman, and Dracula while screaming for help. Prime then says, whoa, I know her from the comic book store, pool box number 87. He then takes off to rescue her, saying, it's prime time, baby. However, after he comes flying in and kicks Wolfman in the face, Witchfire drops the act and reveals herself while saying, eat your heart out, Zatanna, backwards, just like Zatanna does. She then attempts to cast a spell on Superboy Prime, saying, innocence lost, reveal ourselves, trap his soul, heart of gold. Your new master is Witchfire. But while the flames wrapped up in this spell does burn off Superboy Prime's shirt, revealing that he is Superboy Prime, it doesn't really faze him. And he says, sorry, but magic won't even give me a sunburn. Dang it, I just blew my cover. But note there in that last bubble how the word my is backwards. That comes into play shortly. Anyway, Witchfire is now both stunned and frustrated as she says to herself, wait, the cute guy from the comic book store is a superhero? To which Prime responds, sort of, yeah. Did you say I was cute? She tries denying it, but Prime just starts working out what he knows about her in the comics, saying, I know you were in the Power Company. Are you a villain now? To which she replies, what? No. You seem so nice, and I needed an innocent person for a spell. Which makes Prime laugh hysterically, saying, innocent? Read a back issue, lady. I don't think anyone would call me innocent. I maimed a few lame titans and killed a bunch of rando GLs, which is referring to Green Lanterns. He then goes on to say, maybe sort of tried to destroy whole worlds. Most of it was an accident. Or, you know, not my fault. At least that's what I'm trying to retcon. But good or bad, I'm working on a redemption arc. As we see, he's fully suited up and revealed himself to Witchfire. However, the word accident in that last bubble was also all jumbled up. So either some portion of the spell she cast is jumbling up his words, or there's something else going on. So she starts to fly away while telling him, I'll see you at the comic book store. But you know there's no way Prime is going to let her take off without getting some answers. So he asks, why did you need a spell? And she replies, it's nothing. My coven sensed dark magic here in Metropolis. The runes told us someone plans to unleash a demon tonight at midnight. I thought I could use a sacrificial bait spell to draw them out, but that plan crashed and burned. Don't worry about it. But again, who just tries to drop something like, oh, someone's gonna unleash a demon tonight at midnight and then fly off as if that's not gonna raise any other questions? So Prime flies up and says, hold up, what kind of demon? But instead of giving us more explanation from Witchfire, we jump forward a bit and we see that Prime and Witchfire are now fully gothed out and walking toward a club called Hellhole. Prime then speaks for all of us when he asks, why are we dressed like we're in a Vertigo comic? And Witchfire replies, it's called stealth, dude. We need to be sneaky if we want to get close to whoever is playing around with the dark magic. Just be cool, okay? We then see them entering the club and she asks him, what do I call you, by the way? Superman or Superboy? And Prime tells her, some people call me Superboy because they think I haven't totally earned the man part yet, but I guess you can call me Prime. Actually, who are you? Was your name Witchfire or was that just a spell? And she replies, it's my code name and a spell, but my friends call me Rebecca. We are then given a quick overview and backstory of Witchfire as she tells us through narration, I found an old spell book when I was a kid and it tied me to a bunch of supernatural forces. Those forces led me to a lot of things. I became a stunt driver, singer, witch. After I met Wonder Woman, I became a superhero. That was when I joined a group called the Power Company. Magic's been broken and reality rewritten. In the course of all that, I've died a few times, but always found my way back to the world of the living. Prime then responds to all that saying, I can relate to that, the dying and coming back part. Witchfire then pulls him deeper onto the dance floor while telling him, we need to go this way. Come on, blend in with me. Then as we see Prime awkwardly trying to blend in and dance with Witchfire in this club, she asks, so how does one go about a redemption arc? But when he goes to answer her, he accidentally bumps into what appears to be Jimmy Olsen, who recognizes him and tells him, hey, hold on, you look a lot like a friend of mine. But Prime just dances away saying, I get that a lot. See ya, pal. Witchfire asks if he knows that guy, and Prime responds, sort of. Long story. Anyway, she then grabs him and pulls him off the floor saying, come on, this way. The demon magic is radiating from here. And bizarrely, the doorway leads them to some kind of tunnel or dungeon as Witchfire tells Prime, yeah, random dungeon means we're close. I can feel the dark energy spreading already, warping reality. If this continues, it could transform all of Metropolis. But she abruptly changes the subject by asking Prime, who looks like a K-pop character at this point, if he has a girlfriend. And he replies, Lori was my whole world. I'd do anything for her. And last I was back home, we were together for a while and it was great. But we just grew up up and grew apart and broke up. It was hard, but sometimes people here get into a relationship and they just sort of lock into that relationship forever. Not where I'm from. But you know, she's in college and we write to each other. I'm happy for her. And that information clearly makes Rebecca happy. But at that moment, they catch up with the other two witches in her coven, and one of them says, "Who in Hecate's name is this dude? He doesn't look like a sacrifice to me, Rebecca." But the other chimes in saying, "Tell us about it on the way. We might be too late. The abyss calls." So as they're walking, Witchfire introduces the other two witches to Prime, saying, "This is my coven, Encantadora and Mirabal. Girls, this is Prime. Magic doesn't affect him, so I think he can be of use." Now, obviously, the other thing we have to point out here is that the panels have suddenly flipped upside down and are backwards, meaning we're reading from the bottom right to the left and from the bottom to the top. But Prime then says, it's really dark down there. This is all because someone is messing around with dark magic under Metropolis? Encantadora replies, "That's what the runes suggested. Because of the constant destruction and reconstruction of Metropolis, it can sometimes have a deep connection to the supernatural, death and rebirth, etc." The next panel then flips right side up as Prime tries to get his bearings while rubbing his eyes, saying, "Hold on, something is wrong, like I'm upside down." Mirabal then asks, "I thought you said magic doesn't hurt him." And Witchfire replies, "That's what he said. I tried to do a spell on him earlier and it didn't work." However, Prime then says, "This doesn't feel like magic. I've been having these weird visions lately." But one of the witches then says, "Shush, we're here," and too late. So Prime asks, "It's another witch?" And they tell him, "Worse. Much worse." And they were not lying, because as we turn the page, we get a full 2-page spread revealing that they have come face to face with an army of demons led by Lady Blaze and Lord Satanus. These two are extremely powerful twin demonic siblings in the DC universe, so they are about to have their hands full. And Prime, being well versed in the hierarchy of the DC universe, knows that full well. So he says, "I thought you said it would be a demon." But Witchfire just cringes and says, "The nuns always said I was bad at math." We then see Encantadora and Mirabal casting spells and saying, "Crap, Neron runs hell right now, okay? Satanus and his sister must hate that and are looking to call Metropolis their new home. Our best chance is to get close enough to conjure a counter spell." So Witchfire transforms into her suit and asks Prime, "Can you take care of the army of demons?" At which point we see Prime tear his shirt open while telling her, "Oh yeah." He then begins to tear into all these demons alongside Witchfire while screaming, "Let's push our age rating to the extreme." But thankfully, as Prime is laughing hysterically and punching a hole through the chest of another demon, we get a note from Anna with legal that says it's okay if he dismembers demons. Anyway, Witchfire realizes that Prime is having way more fun than he should be, and she asks, "You're enjoying this?" And he replies, "I never get to cut loose like this anymore. I needed the workout." Lady Blaze and Satanus then tell them, "Metropolis will be ours. Together we will rule our own domain of hell. You three witches and the wannabe Superman will be our playthings." And as they're saying this, Prime screams, "They're monologuing. Now is your magic moment." But Mirabal just tells him, "You do your job and let us do ours." We then see Lady Blaze rip open a portal between worlds while saying, "Come on, brother. The hordes of hell are hungry." Mirabal then says, "One of us will need to be the vessel for the counterspell." And Witchfire tells her, "It's my turn. Light me up." We then see Witchfire completely engulfed in flame while saying, "Power of pain, soul of suffering, grant me this gift." And on the next page, we see her transform into this fiery angelic figure with the Wings of Wonder spell, followed by a massive burst of magical energy that closes the portal and sends the demons back to hell. Witchfire then reverts back to her normal form while Superboy Prime just stares, saying, "Whoa." However, the spell that's pulling all of the demons back into hell begins to pull on Prime, Witchfire, and the other witches. So Encantadora and Mirabal open up their own exit and dive through while saying, "We'll see you back home later, Witchfire. Have fun on the rest of your date." But Prime's not getting stuck, so he grabs Witchfire and flies through the portal just before it closes. Alright, so they've saved the day and they've made it back to Metropolis, and Superboy Prime tells Witchfire, "That was fun. Fighting demons was on my bucket list. Thanks for letting me join." And she replies, "Thanks for helping me save Metropolis from becoming hell on Earth." But as we would expect here, things start getting romantic, and as the two lean in for a kiss while going back and forth about whether or not this was a date, Superboy Prime's words suddenly become jumbled, and he's no longer speaking English. This obviously ruins the vibe, and Witchfire says, "I'm sorry, what did you say?" And when Superboy Prime goes to respond, he just starts freaking out because all he can say is gibberish. Witchfire then tells him, okay, calm down. I can't tell if this is a spell or something else, but your aura is being manipulated." Prime then screams in pain and gets ripped through the pages of the comic, leaving Witchfire completely confused and in utter disbelief at what she's looking at, because what she's looking at is a tear in the barrier between her comic world and the real world. Then as we turn the page, we actually get to see Superboy Prime being ripped out of the pages of this exact comic. He's actually bursting out of the promo page for Superman Father of Tomorrow issue 1, which also came out this week. But we are then shown a full comic interior layout page with Dan Mora's actual post-it note at the upper right corner. So this is supposed to be an original pencil page for Dan Mora for this Superman issue. And Superboy Prime, who has been ripped out of this comic and into the real world, is bouncing across the panels in this interior page. All while the mysterious voice that we heard earlier begins to tell him, "I should have been able to do this earlier, mate. Get into your head and pull you to me." But because of Lex, that bald motherfreaker, I'm not at my full power anymore. It just took some time, pushing and picking, invading the deepest parts of your brain, little by little, hiding within your doubts. Your mind is bloody strong, but mine is strong too. Swimming in your dirty mind has unlocked some new toys with my own powers. I know you. I know your world, the real world. I know all your secrets. Which reveals that all of these moments where Prime has suddenly been pulled out of reality has just been Manchester Black manipulating and corrupting his mind. And as we see him appear in front of Prime, he continues to tell him, but knowing secrets is not enough. You and I both know this world should be something different, more like where you're from. And you're gonna help me change this world for the better and give me my old life back. Prime then looks up, still disoriented, and says, "I know you, Manchester Black. You're one of the elite. You have some kind of mind powers." And Manchester replies, "It's always nice to meet a fan." But the still confused Prime asks, "What do you want? I thought you helped Superman." And Manchester replies, "And look at what it got me. You of all people should know redemption arcs are not for the faint of heart. As for what I want you to punch this reality as hard as you can." Now that infuriates Superboy Prime, and he yells, "It's too dangerous," followed by attempting to blast Manchester Black in the face with his heat vision. But again, this is just some kind of projection of Manchester Black, so it goes right through him as he tells Prime, "When did you ever worry about dangerous? You've grown weak, kid. Soft. Let's take a stroll down memory lane to remind you of who you really are." Manchester's boot then materializes and he kicks Superboy Prime through another barrier. And on the final panels of this issue, we see that Superboy Prime has been knocked back into the past, into his younger form, his original form, his first appearance in comics as Superboy Prime. And he says to himself, "My costume, my old one, the original, but I haven't worn that since." Oh no, please no. As he turns and realizes that Manchester Black has sent him back to the end of the Infinite Crisis event, with the entire DC universe descending onto him. This is just a crazy cool idea, and Josh Williamson speaking through Manchester Black is not wrong. That nostalgia works, man. Regardless, as the solicits for issue 39 confirms, it is now going to be Superboy Prime versus DC Comics. Manchester Black is going to drag Superboy Prime all over the history of the DC universe, past events, lost reboots, relaunches, you name it. And he's going to have to fight his way through every era in the hopes of making his way back to Metropolis and Witchfire before Superman gets back. Because all this poor dude is trying to do is prove that he can be a true superhero. Dude, I don't know about you. I know I'm not going to speak for everyone, but I freaking love this idea. Just as a concept, it's like a mix between classic Silver Age comics and Saturday morning cartoon vibes. It's great. And if you're digging what Josh Williamson is doing with the Superman title the way that I am, we have got to make sure that we are supporting the work these creators are doing. So I've got first print copies of Superman 37, 38, and the pre-order for Superman 39 up at variantcomics.com right now. So if you haven't already picked up a physical copy of these issues, jump over there and grab one before they're sold out. The link for that is also in the description. Then come join me in the comments and drop your thoughts on this story. It's always great to hear your take on these stories, and I like to hear what you guys would like to see us cover next. Other than that, my friends, I will see you next time when we talk about all things comics.